Hello everyone and welcome to MMA Start to Finish. I'm Julian and this is Matt.
Hi.
And today we're going to be talking about UFC 11, the proving ground, or the ground of sadness as I like to call it.
It proved something.
It proved that something doesn't work.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into it. Anyway, this event was held on September 20th, 1996, and as always, or as we try to remember, we check on the venue to see if it's still standing. And from its Wikipedia page, I don't see any demolition date, so to me that indicates that it still exists. If we lived closer, if we were in the state of Georgia, maybe we'd check, but not in our immediate area, to put it lightly.
No, not at all. So here in Augusta, Georgia, they decided it was a good fact to mention that this used to be the second largest producer of cotton. Some troubled history, I guess.
A lot of these telecasts don't age well.
No.
For reasons you wouldn't suspect before watching.
No.
You would not expect to have this sordid history of our nation brought up during some sublegal fights.
No. I mean, it's not like they mean anything rude by it. It's just...
No, they're just like, this is a historical fact. Ain't that kind of neat?
Yeah.
It's just kind of weird, you know, because...
Like today...
What happened?
That's not the casual fact you'd want to brag about for this town.
Yeah, there's a little more reverence with that topic. Not just like, by the way, fun fact, plantations.
Yeah.
So, as you can see here on the video, our boy Tank Abbott, if you're watching on the YouTube version of the podcast, or listening, I should say, this is our first episode with a live show. I took some screenshots from the event to help us better illustrate some of our points. And
visuals are fun.
Yeah, so this is a bonus if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on another platform, thanks for checking us out. And if you want a little bit more engagement, check out the YouTube channel. Anyway, you can see our boy Tank Abbott has returned. The runner-up of UFC 6 is back from suspension. Suspension for what, you might ask? Remember the brawl in Bohlander, Puerto Rico? Apparently, Tank was up to some shit, and he's the reason that chairs were thrown.
Yeah, he was the distracting fight between fights. Tank was just as braggadocious in his interview with Don Wilson, but I think that's kind of what we expect from him at this point.
Yeah, Tank isn't exactly a character who tries to share his humble nature with the audience.
No.
He's more of like a Stone Cold figure. There's a lot of Stone Cold Steve Austin snatching at this point, by the way. Like late 96, the character's just starting to take off. And there's a very close relationship, as you all know, between MMA and pro wrestling. As a matter of fact, I was just telling Matt earlier, Dan Severn over the past week, I don't remember what day exactly, fought fucking Frank Mir in a pro wrestling event, which is just the most ridiculous sentence I didn't think I'd say in 2019. But honestly, that's not true. That doesn't even make the list of crazy shit that's happened this year, but I digress.
So we've got a few changes to the rules again. The times have been changed to 15-minute, I guess, rounds.
Yeah, 15-minute fights for the quarter and semifinals, and 20-minute fights for the finals. The semi and final fights also get 3-minute overtimes, as you can see on this graph of the laws. Or I guess not graph, it's more like an infographic, but the laws of the octagon.
Yeah. Even though they still have the advertisement of, there are no rules.
Yeah, they have banners from old events, and it sends a little bit of the wrong message, perhaps.
Yeah. Especially when they're in, like...
Legal trouble?
Quasi-legal standing.
Yeah, not exactly a great representative for the sport to have no rules still hanging in the rafters.
No. And we're also down... Not nearly as significant, but we're down a few thousand pay-per-views. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe the drop was from 96,000 to 92,000. So not as much of a precipitous drop. Remember, from UFC 9 to 10, it was like a 50,000 view drop off. So to only lose like 4, not that bad considering recent precedent.
I think it was something like you had to call your provider to see if you could get access to it.
Yeah, by this point, most providers had dropped the UFC. There was one provider who was like the Crusader, basically, and they wind up like mentioning them by name on the telecast a bunch later on, because at a certain point, they were the only people who provided access to these fights, because they were so scandalous. So you can see here the main draw for UFC 11. The first fight was Julian Sanchez versus Mark the Hammer Coleman, and you can see the rest of the fights we have here. These would not be necessarily the competitors we saw in the end, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, the first fight of the night was Julian Sanchez versus Mark Coleman, and Julian Sanchez has the dubious honor of not having a Wikipedia page.
Nope.
So you can kind of guess if you haven't seen it how this fight went.
He's also 50 pounds lighter than Mark Coleman.
So as you can see from this photograph, Mark is a very strong man. He's able to lift Julian off the ground. I gotta say, not doing the name proud as a fellow Julian, I was very disappointed by his showing here. You know, I don't really think Julian Sanchez had any grappling experience because Mark just yanked on one leg and ripped him to the ground.
Well, he said he wanted to go to the ground. That's where he wanted Mark.
I mean, he didn't seem like he had the skills to make sure he was on the ground in a way that actually benefited him. You know what I mean? I mean, he was on the ground. I guess he got what he wanted.
You gotta fake it till you make it.
Yeah, I mean, like, when they have in their bio, like, limited bare knuckle experience, I'm always like, oh, Jesus. Like, is this going to be a shit show?
Yeah.
Is this going to be something that's going to piss off the ghost of John McCain? Like, what are we watching?
Julian did look a little too nice to fight.
Yeah, he looked like a dude that would sell, like, really good, authentic, like, Hispanic food.
I guess.
And you'd, like, go to the food truck and you'd order some, like, dope, like, rice and beans and, like, chicken.
I love rice and beans.
Anyway, we digress. We're kind of hungry, but we did eat pizza, so I don't know why.
Yeah.
One note about Mark, I think you said he had a trapezoid neck.
Yes.
A very specific shape for his very large neck.
He got just a smidge bulkier.
He did, yeah. They did note on commentary that Mark actually added on a couple of pounds since the last event. I have on in my notes, Mark's neck is the size of my leg. So, large boy.
It could be thicker.
Dude, you're right. So as far as like what actually happened in the fight itself, there's not a ton to talk about. How quickly did this one progress? This fight only lasted for 45 seconds.
Yeah.
Mark yanks him to the ground, puts him in what I thought was an anaconda choke, and from that position also threw some strikes to the head. But on Wikipedia they have scarf hold choke, which I have not seen before, but
I would have called it submission to punches, just because it didn't look like a very strong choke.
You know, it's just one of those positions where I don't think he was perhaps in the most danger in the world, but realized, like, oh, I'm just not even close to the level of skill as this guy, so I need to tap out before I get fucked up.
Yeah.
Which I respect, you know. Live to fight another day.
Coleman knocked him over like a bag of potatoes, and it just seemed like Sanchez didn't have any idea what was going on.
Oh, and by the way, we failed to mention this earlier. We saw when the announcements were being made that our boy Rich Goins is back, even if they did spell his name wrong on the graphic. They had Rick Goins.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Peeking in the background, we saw our friend Ken Shamrock.
Ken is here in the city of Augusta, Georgia.
He's just not saying it.
To watch this shit show.
Yeah. He's always peering around the corner.
I wonder, given that, and a little bit of spoiler, Scott Ferrozzo, given that Bruce Buffer was Scott Ferrozzo's manager, do you think he was lurking somewhere in the back just chilling?
He might have been in the locker room.
I'm sure he was around, right?
He must have been in the locker room.
You think he was cheese that they were like, we're going to go back to Rich for this one? Or was he like, whatever, dude? If I ever meet Bruce, I got to ask him if he harbors any resentment to
Rich
Goins. I don't think so. It seems like he outlasted him.
I think he did.
Unless he's like an extremely bitter man.
Like, this is all just against Rich Goin. That's the only reason he stayed with the UFC.
For all these years. By the way, fun fact about Bruce Buffer. Like, I know we're all over the place here. But Bruce, if you pay him enough money, he will leave you a custom voicemail.
Really?
So, yeah.
I didn't know this.
Yes, you put it on Twitter. If you pay him enough money, he'll leave a voicemail and, like, announce, like, this is the voicemail of blah, blah, blah. Leave a message in, like, Bruce Buffer voice.
You know, I got a pretty common name. I could probably just get someone else's.
I don't know if they're made public.
True.
I think they're private transactions.
Well, if I just find them announcing someone named Matt, I got Audacity. I can do this.
Up next, we have Reza Nasri from, I may be pronouncing that wrong, I apologize, from Iran, facing off against the AKA product, Brian Johnston. And I have here, Brian, way taller, like 6'4", and I believe Reza was 5'10".
Yes.
Pretty significant height differential there. And almost immediately, Brian just blasted Reza and took him to the ground. This fight went on for even less than the Mark Coleman fight.
28 seconds. As a lot of hurting for Reza.
A lot of pain for 28 seconds.
Yeah. Reza got some hard knees by Brian, and then they went to the fence. Brian takes him to the ground and gets a mount. And Big John McCarthy kind of stumbles over the two of them to stop the fight.
Yeah, apparently, based on what commentary told us, Big John apologized to Reza for not stopping the fight sooner. And I don't know how this happened, but even though Brian dominated this fight, he did have a bloody nose at the end of it. So I guess Reza got one punch in there.
I feel like they showed footage later on that showed he got hit with some glancing blow, but it was enough to bust his nose open.
Yeah.
Brian was also very, you said, just excited.
Animated.
Yeah.
Very exuberant in his victory. It looked like without context, it looked like he was either screaming at Big John or screaming at Reza on the ground. And I think he was just like releasing, adrenaline, being all excited.
Releasing his steroid angers.
I mean, I don't want to, allegedly, it's important we add that caveat. I don't want to defame the great Brian Johnston.
You wouldn't want to get in a fight with him?
All I'm going to say is, I don't know how strict the tests were they had to take in Augusta, Georgia.
I don't think they took tests.
You're probably right. You know what? When we get to
You
Pride...
think they'd let Mark Coleman in, looking like how he does?
Dude, when we get to Pride, it's in their contract where they're like, we specifically will not test you for steroids. Like, they mention it in the contract.
At least they're accepting about it.
They're open. Yeah, I mean, dude, for a company run by the Yakuza, I imagine they'd be pretty cool about that shit.
Can't say that.
Anyway, we'll get there. So, before I transition to this next photo of Tank Abbott and Sam Adkins fighting, I just want to mention that Tank is actually even larger than he was previously. They mentioned he'd actually put on weight. And Sam did not want to get into a grappling exchange. He explicitly stated he wanted to keep this fight on the feet. And,
Great audio.
Yeah, if you're listening to this on just the podcast one, I greatly apologize. If you're watching the video, you understand. Tank tore this poor bald version of himself to the ground and made him his bitch, kind of.
Yeah.
He finished him with a forearm choke up against the cage and made him look like a fish gasping for air.
Yeah, he just kind of ground the top of his head and face into the fence. It was not a very flattering image for Sam Adkins.
To this point, the longest fight of the night, 2 minutes it took for Tank to dominate Sam.
Yeah, that including the alternate bouts, which, well, they'll come into play later.
Yeah, the alternate bout's a little more notable than in most UFCs.
Yeah. But otherwise, a pretty quick fight.
Yeah, not a lot of analysis for this event. I was reading on the Wikipedia page, and let me just read this quote for you. Due to the spoiler, by the way, if you're not aware of how UFC 11 ends. Due to Mark Coleman winning by default and the vast amount of short matches, this pay-per-view has been called incomplete and disorganized by viewers. Now, I gotta check the citation on that for Wikipedia, but I understand the sentiment for sure.
Yeah.
Up next, we see the return of Jerry Bohlander taking on Fabio. And we kept joking his name was Gurgle. We're probably pronouncing that wrong. But a really accomplished jiu-jitsu practitioner who I believe they said he came from like Gracie lineage.
Mm-hmm.
So he had legit credentials. Didn't exactly translate into a thriving MMA career. I looked at his Wikipedia. Not a ton of fights on there. A lot of jiu-jitsu credentials, like I mentioned. But this was our first decision of the night. And you see them, they have this grappling exchange to begin with, because both these guys are grapplers, right? Jerry's a wrestler. He trains out of the Lion's Den with Ken and the like. Fabio, jiu-jitsu practitioner.
Yep.
So it was kind of cool to see their grappling exchange for a little bit. But once they got to the ground, things kind of...
It quickly went to the Gracie school of thought.
Yeah, it became a little stale. Also, notable, both these guys don't have gloves. At this point, more fighters than not are wearing gloves into the octagon. One thing to note, before things went into Fabio's guard, Jerry threw some leg kicks on the ground, and those are a big fucking no-no when you have shoes on, sir.
Yeah.
And I believe they said on commentary that he's actually getting fined for those kicks because of the shoes, and if he did it again, he would have been disqualified.
I think they didn't really say how much these guys are getting paid regardless
No,
of
yeah.
how much they win. So I feel like he pretty much just lost all of his money that night.
Yeah, I wonder if it was like a strict number or a percentage. Dude, wouldn't it be fucked up if he actually got fined so much that he wound up losing money from the event?
That'd be awful.
I could see it happening.
I wouldn't want to return. Or just never wear shoes again.
Shoes in the cage. The rules change a little bit in the future, and we're going to see some crazy shit when... There was a brief window in UFC history where it was legal to kick somebody in the face with a fucking shoe on.
Yeah.
Which is insane, and we'll get there.
But eventually this went to decision for Bohlander.
Yeah, there's a lot of like little things we could talk about in this fight. Like Jerry got a cut across his forehead somehow during an exchange. There was some threat of a triangle by Fabio late in the fight. Jerry, I think, you said he tore the cage, right, during some exchange?
Yeah, the fence was bent.
Yeah, he like uprooted it from the ground, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and it was all warped. Kind of like a playground fence.
Yeah.
Where, like, someone's just going buck wild on it. And, well, that's just how the cage is for the rest of the night.
Yeah. So after this 15-minute decision, Jerry would advance into the semifinals, and we now have ourselves, for an event that wasn't exactly the most exciting in the world, a pretty cool fight. Mark Coleman versus Brian Johnston. Yeah, so Matt, give me your thoughts on the Brian Johnston-Mark Coleman fight.
Oh, boy. They're pretty close size-wise, like, for what we've been dealing with.
Coleman's a little wider, but I think Brian's significantly taller by about 3 or 4 inches.
But even just, I meant, like, weight. They're only 15 pounds difference.
Yeah.
Which is almost a weight class.
Yeah, it's, dude.
In similarity.
For...
Compared to what we're used to.
Yeah, for an event with no weight classes, a pretty close comparison here.
They started off just by sizing each other up, but the leg kicks started annoying Mark from Brian. Mark just bum rushes in at one point, though, but almost flips himself off of Brian from going so fast.
He's just so strong.
But quickly gets into a side guard, or is it side control?
He was in half guard. I think he... When the takedown initially happened, he had him in side control, but Brian was smart enough to transition into half guard.
Kind of starts beating the shit out of
Yeah, just beating the shit out of him.
Brian. With headbutts, punches, and Brian flips onto his stomach, and I guess he either tapped or verbally tapped.
Yeah, on Wikipedia, and I believe later in the telecast, the commentary stated that he submitted verbally, I think. It says submission to strikes on Wikipedia, but that doesn't tell us if it was a physical tap or a verbal tap. I didn't see a physical tap.
I didn't see a physical tap either.
I mean, I know the picture we have here is Brian just getting smothered, but things in this fight weren't necessarily this grim for him early. Early on, he was keeping distance well. He had crisp hands. He had some leg kicks he was utilizing, I believe. And things looked okay, but once Mark got a hold of him, those Olympic wrestling skills took over.
Yeah, he's just too strong.
Again, not to harp on a point that I bring up a lot and is obvious by the way things are now, but weight class is kind of important.
Oh, yeah, and then it pans over to Mark Coleman's parents, who are oddly stoic and kind of farmy.
Yeah, for, your son about to go into the closest thing to a modern-day gladiatorial arena.
Yeah.
Pretty chill. Pretty chill.
Not a whole lot of big emotions coming out of his parents.
I guess they knew he was going to dominate. I mean, he's undefeated at this point.
I fed him his vegetables. He knows what he's doing.
So, after the Mark Coleman-Brian Johnston fight, things kind of come off the rails.
What you were probably expecting was to see Mr. Bohlander right here, but instead we have our nice large friend, Scott Ferrozzo.
Who we get to know quite well in this bout with Tank Abbott, the second semifinal. Now, Scott, as you would imagine, was an alternate, and he won his alternate bout in 1 minute and 45 seconds by submission to strikes. not only is Scott a large man, as you can see in this photograph, Scott is a larger man than Tank.
Yes.
Like,
Tank
significantly.
Tank is, I think he was 298 pounds. Scott Ferrozzo is 350 pounds.
Now, I know Matt has some fun quotes from the broadcast for us about Tank, so I'll let him share those with us now.
So, in their interview between the fights, this wasn't on camera as far as we know. Tank's hobbies are going to bars, getting crazy, and raising hell. This fits his braggadocious behavior.
Raising hell, a turn of phrase popularized by a different man with a goatee in a combat sport, if you want to call pro wrestling a combat sport, which you probably shouldn't. But you get the parallel anyway.
Yeah. He also bragged that his arrest record for assault would top everyone else's combined tonight.
I mean, not exactly a great anecdote to share when your sport is in legal trouble. But hey, I appreciate the transparency, I guess.
At least we know his crimes as opposed to some...
Yeah, we don't have to
other
fucking
people.
pull up his Wikipedia page and find a mugshot.
Yeah.
So Scott, a very strong man. And the fight between him and Tank was a tale of two different fights. One, very exciting. Them trading on the feet, just throwing bombs at each other. Barely any technique. Just trying to, knock each other out with hammers.
I kind of jokingly said I want to see them just go in both windmilling their arms.
They
And
borderline did.
They almost did. And, well, you can see here, Scott's getting his face caved in, but...
Don't let this picture deceive you, though. I believe Scott got the better of most of these standing exchanges.
Oh, yeah. Like, he says... Well, you can see him getting hit, but he says he never even got rocked.
Yeah, in his post-fight interview, he told that to Jeff Blatnick, I believe.
Yeah, so...
I mean,
held out pretty well.
I don't want to say he's lying to us, but fighters are always going to play it tough a little bit.
They're
Be
gonna
like, oh, he never
exaggerate.
had me at all. Unfortunately, this fight wasn't just a crazy fun brawl. It was also, the other side of this fight, the other tale, was this.
A lot of this.
A lot of this. And I'd like to think that this fight was probably something shown to the rules committee when they were deciding to make cage grabs illegal, because 30 to 40% of this fight was that bomb exchange on the feet. The 60 to 70% of this fight was Tank just grabbing Scott up against the cage while Scott told him to go fuck himself, very audibly, to the point where they had to bleep it on the telecast, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Several times, mind you.
Yeah. And from this, I think we've kind of learned not Scott's, but Tank's method of fighting for when he isn't quite sure what to do, which is to lean his head in forward, which should get him
Choked out
or knocked out
in a lot of scenarios, yeah.
especially these days, but didn't happen here, at least not yet. Lean his head in forward and use his arms kind of like bull horns, and whichever arm you get caught in, he then uses that to pin you to the fence by holding on, and holds there until something changes in his benefit.
It's a very unorthodox strategy. If he doesn't just clearly have a size and power advantage, he seems like he's sort of lost in there.
Yeah.
But that's what you get with early UFC, Not all these guys are going to be masters of technique. Some of them are just big and strong and like to smack.
Yeah. But Scott didn't let that just happen. He decided to use this to his advantage by just savagely kneeing Tank Abbott in both his stomach and his balls.
Lots of knees to the nuts here. No love lost between these gentlemen, as you can clearly tell by the pleasantries exchanged. And, by the way, I think a lot of Scott's advantages and success on the feet probably had to do with his training with Don Fry. Don was in his corner, and after he won the fight, he mentioned Don in his post-fight interview as, I couldn't have done it without this guy, he said, and Don was like, nah, waving his hand at him like, oh,
Yeah.
stop it.
Don, I think he wanted to just stay more in the background for this night.
Yeah, he wasn't fighting tonight. The Predator was not going to be unleashed, so he was just Don, So, yeah, this was kind of a tale of two fights, trading on the feet and, just being clinched up against the fence. Big John did break them up a few times, but they wound up back in the same position. Honestly, I blame Tank almost 100% because Scott clearly did want to trade. And Tank was like, this man big, I need to do something about this. Even when the fight went into overtime, it was just, a repeat, a microcosm of the 15-minute fight, where, a little bit of trading on the feet, Tank decides, fuck all that noise, grabs Scott, goes up against the cage, and we wait.
Yeah.
And we press the advanced 10 seconds button like 8 times.
It's not like Tank didn't do damage, because Scott, they did have to stop the fight at one point for a cut on Scott's, I think, eyebrow.
Yeah, around his eye.
Yeah, and they let him go and continue to fight, obviously, but they did have to stop because of damage dealt by Tank.
Yeah, in those exchanges, it wasn't like Tank was swinging at air. He did connect with Scott quite a few times, but it seemed like Scott had the power advantage, and more of his shots landed than Tank's. But of course, that is not to say that Tank didn't get anything through, because... Also, I should have mentioned this a while ago, but during his interview earlier on, he mentioned that he resented the name pit fighting and that somebody else made that up for him, and he's been going by street fighting now. Funny enough, guess what Scott Ferrozzo's listed fighting style was? Pit fighting. So he's a street fighter, and somebody just made that shit up for him, which is hilarious.
I'm looking at my notes for this. Tank loves his fences. Crowd likes Scott. At this point, we're in overtime. The crowd has swarmed for Scott instead of Tank. Tank was the crowd favorite. They had the poster with just Tank's face.
Yeah, let's go back to this picture here. You can see Tank, Abbott, and this is a little bit of a stretched image if you're watching on YouTube. Kind of looks like Donald Trump on the poster in the background. I don't know why, but that is indeed Tank's face. His face was the poster for this event.
Yeah.
He was the poster boy, as a matter of fact.
Tank loves his fences. Tank only shops from illegal resellers. I don't know where that one came from.
It's a joke about fences, you see.
Yeah. Oh. I forgot my own fucking pun.
Yeah. You forgot your own shitty joke that makes me angry.
Yeah. Tank disappointment. His love for marking property borders was his downfall.
Jesus Christ.
Scott wins.
This was a shit show, okay? We're not going to be even attempt to feign seriousness here. This fight was, I don't want to say it was a joke, but it was like a crazy, fun, hot mess. And then after this, the event completely falls off the rails.
Yeah. This was entirely expected, I think, from the get-go.
Law of large numbers here, at a certain point when you hold so many tournaments, one of them is going to crumble under its own concept, especially when they're, all in one night. Bellator now, to, cut to modern day a little bit, Bellator does tournaments, but they're, spaced out over the course of months, where, they'll have all the guys fight their first-round matchup on one night, and then 3 months later, they'll all do their semifinal, and then months later, they'll do the final, etc., etc. Having all these dudes fight on the same night, they're going to get fucked up, and they're not going to be able to fight. So as you can see here, the original final for UFC 11 was going to be Mark Coleman versus Scott Ferrozzo. After that battle with Tank...
Which... I don't mean to interrupt too much.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
This is 100-pound difference, but this time, the guy who's 100 pounds bigger could win.
It would have been an interesting fight. It would have been interesting to see if Mark was going to be able to get him on the ground. I imagine he would have at some point, but Scott was probably going to get 1 or 2 shots through.
Yeah. It more than likely would have gone to the ground. I don't know how Scott would have done on the ground. Probably not nearly as well as Mark, but just his sheer size might make it kind of difficult.
Absolute unit, in fact.
Yeah. Dating us like that with a meme. But most of our huge contenders always go down real quick. Scott held up pretty well.
Against Tank.
At least against Tank.
I look forward to seeing him in the future. Now, if you haven't watched UFC 11, you might be like, what do you mean in the future? Isn't he going to fight Mark? Wrong. He was injured, could not continue. So we have the other alternate, Travon. What is Travon's first name? Roberto Travon, who won his bout by submission to strikes as well.
By destroying a berry.
Dave Barry was his victim.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he fucked him up so bad, he broke his hand. So the second alternate was unable to continue. And they kind of ran out of dudes.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, what that means, anticlimactically, Mark wins.
He's like, oh, okay.
He's like, hey, guys, I don't think he wanted it that way.
No.
I don't think he wanted to go out like that,
No.
It's kind of fucked up because you can see his manager and him clearly wanted to challenge some Gracies after he won the tournament. But it's a little weird to challenge people after you win a tournament by
default.
Default. Yeah, on Wikipedia, we are informed that this was the first and only tournament to end by default. So thankfully, for the remainder of the tournament format, we won't see such a complete and total meltdown.
They had a shot of Mark in the locker room before they had him come out on to the cage again, just to say, like, you won, go
Yeah, he
take
looked
your
so
money.
confused. He was like, what?
Who am I fighting if it's not that guy? And Tank was perusing in the crowd. You could tell he wanted to fight, but they're not going to let him
Yeah,
because
I mean, he lost. Yeah.
You can't just lose and then keep going.
So bitter disappointment for the people of Augusta, Georgia, here at UFC 11. Even though this was kind of a shit show, I had fun watching it. A lot of these are not necessarily going to be the greatest sporting spectacles in the world.
No.
But one of the things that we want to do with this podcast is just, fuck around and have fun. And it's a lot of fun to watch an old 90s UFC event implode.
Yeah. It's interesting.
And watch them make shit up on the fly, mind you.
Yeah. It's interesting to see how, like, you can kind of guess that it's not going to work out every time because you only have 2 alternates. Things are going to go wrong. Murphy's Law.
Yeah, this thing has been foreshadowed before. It's not like we haven't had tournaments get a little weird, but this was a complete meltdown.
Yeah. And so it's interesting to see how it falls apart. Seeing people react to it,
In real time.
Yeah. It's like, well, what do we do? It's like, I guess you just win.
It's almost like I'm watching an episode of Punk'd. I'm waiting for Ashton to pop out of the floor of the octagon and be like, we got you, Mark. So up next on MMA Start to Finish, we're not going to be jumping to UFC 12 quite yet. We have the second Ultimate of the year. I'm assuming once again held in December. It seems like the Ultimate was a concept where they had like this like mega tournament at the end of the year with a lot of big names. And we see here in the thumbnail, Don, Fry, and Tank. So that's going to be a fun time.
Yeah. I hope it goes in Don's favor.
Me too. I'm a fan of the Predator.
I like Don.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the podcast, please be sure to leave a like and a comment if you have any fun information you want to add about UFC 11 or just your take on this dumpster fire. To be a little bit candid with you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time with UFC 11.5, which is a garbage name. So, the Ultimate 96.
Bye, we love you.